Welcome to Storytime with the Intimacy Ally. Each episode will tear down a myth, kick a social norm in the beanbag, gut punch a sex ed untruth, or destroy a poorly constructed relationship expectation. Get ready to unlearn all the crap you accepted as fact. Strap in for a mind-blowing revision on what sex is and what it can do. Prepare yourself for a whole new thought pattern when it comes to modern relationships. And now, here's your host, Jenny Simus, the Intimacy Ally, relationship expert and certified sex and intimacy coach.
Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to Storytime with the Intimacy Ally. I am joined here today by one of my sex positivity heroes, a man whose signature is on my Sexual Health Alliance sex coach certification. And he is Dr. David Ley. He is a clinical psychologist, sex therapist, and author based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's the author of several books and research articles on sexuality, including his second book, The Myth of Sex Addiction, which started a firestorm of controversy about the validity of the concept of sex and porn addiction. His third book presents a model for men to use their approach for pornography in a healthy manner. And Dr. Ley is a frequent guest in media around the world. His appearances can be found in the New York Times, CNN, Time Magazine, Hustler, Playboy, you name it. So here we are. Dr. Ley, how you doing?
I'm great, and David is just fine. Jenny, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy and proud of you completing your certification with Sexual Health Alliance. Listeners should know that Sexual Health Alliance is one of the groups that's out there training folks like Jenny in terms of how to work effectively, proactively, and in a positive, non-shaming way around sexuality. So folks like Jenny just really bring happiness to my heart that we are spreading the good word around these issues and challenging. Honestly, I mean, I genuinely think about the folks that you will work with, Jenny, that will get the opportunity to experience talking about sexuality in a way that doesn't involve shame or stigma or bias. And that is world changing. We need more of that. We need more people like you. So I'm just thrilled that you're doing what you're doing.
Yay. Oh, thank you. And when we first started talking about this topic, like I had done this episode last week about female pornography consumption, like basically some myths surrounding it. Not really diving too much into research because I'm not a research scientist, but also finding there wasn't a whole lot of research on it. So that's kind of disheartening. And really talking about my own story and my own introduction to pornography as a very curious child. I mean, honestly, I think that's how a lot of us found it. Like, I stumbled upon my older brother's porn collection, which was all VHS. And, when nobody else was around, kind of snooped through that and was like, well, I guess I wouldn't go looking for this, but it's kind of cool. I don't know. And I just wonder, how do we kind of approach letting more women know that this is okay, and that like this idea that I feel like a lot of men enter relationships with women thinking, oh, all she needs is like a little romance novel and she'll be good to go. Like, how can we battle that and like get it to be more socially acceptable that, yeah, we like porn and we like some really raucous porn?
Yeah. I mean, women who watch porn, are subject to some of the greatest levels of slut shaming. Understandably. I mean, not understandably. I'm not agreeing with that, but watching porn is a real hallmark of engaging in sexuality solely for the sake of pleasure. And historically, any sex other than sex for procreation or sex for love was seen as morally suspect. And Historically, women are more likely to view sex when it is within relationship, when it is to get pregnant and have a baby, as acceptable. And masturbation to pornography, and let us be clear that 90% of porn consumption is accompanied by masturbation. Pornography
Mm-hmm.
is a tool to enhance sexual arousal during masturbation. Masturbation itself is seen as selfish
Mm-hmm.
and hedonistic because it is just for the pleasure of sexual pleasure and orgasm. And
Mm-hmm.
so when women are engaging in sex just for the pleasure of it, men start to get kind of threatened by that,
Mm-hmm.
and want to condemn it and control it. And so, the reason why fewer numbers of women watch pornography compared to men is largely because female sexuality is being suppressed and denied.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about this, I also want to point out that I wonder, like, even if there is research, are women not actually participating in that research? Like, are they scared to admit even that they do this?
Probably, maybe. It, first, it's really only in the past 10 or 15 years that we've seen research looking at aspects of sexuality that goes beyond pregnancy prevention or STI prevention. Starting in
Okay.
the 1980s, for about 20 years, the only sexuality research that could really get funded was research looking at, again, pregnancy or AIDS prevention, right?
Right.
Um, it's only in the past 10, 15 years, honestly, during the Obama administration was when the federal government started funding a more broad array of sexual health research.
Okay.
So we're learning more about these kind of pregnancy or STI focused aspects of sexuality. What we're seeing over the past couple of decades, a good bit of objective research looking at non-clinical samples, looking at samples that are not just on college campuses, so they're convenient
Mm-hmm.
samples. Um, we find roughly 70 to 90% of men, and it depends on age. If you look at younger ages, more males report porn consumption than older ages in the past year. Now,
Hmm.
older men will report at high levels that they have ever watched pornography, but if you look in the past year, you get smaller numbers as you get older. Um, when we look at women, we find around between 40 and 65% of women, even down at younger ages, will report porn consumption. And younger women are more likely to report porn consumption in the past year or two.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not seeing it at the numbers that we see in men. Now, we do see it increasing as stigma around female sexuality and female sexual independence is reducing,
Mm-hmm.
and as stigma around pornography is decreasing. Um, will those numbers ever kind of equal out with men? I don't know.
Right. Right. Well, and I don't know either. And, the research that I did see when I started looking at this was old. Like, it was old. And I think it was like only one study, and it was like a Nielsen thing that was like trying to figure out, what percentage of women were on Pornhub. And I
Hmm.
think it was a third. I think that's what they came up with. There's so many other ways. I never go on Pornhub. Like I've never watched porn on Pornhub. Like there's so many
Hmm.
other avenues for that. So that's not really representative of me or like my kink community. So there's that. Um, Also, what bothers me, I think, right now is the political climate
Hmm.
and all of the religious oppression that's like starting back up or just never went away, but is getting real, real loud in
Yeah,
America.
it's very empowered, and we have numerous states, passing laws that pornography is a public, well, passing legislation that pornography is a public health crisis. Now, passing legislation to try to prevent or limit access to pornography by doing age verification, which, yeah, in theory is intended to, just prevent underage people from seeing porn. But because it requires people to present ID, a lot of viewers of pornography are not going to be interested in losing their anonymity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
potentially being exposed. And so these laws appear to act to simply suppress access to pornography in adults as well.
Right.
And they are overwhelmingly, as you said, religiously motivated. These laws are overwhelmingly introduced by religious legislators in all of these states.
Right. And, we've had the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We're losing, women power, women empowerment, like body
Mm-hmm.
autonomy battles
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And it's terrifying. And then I look back at history and, from my earliest memories, because, I was born in 80. So like by like, let's say 88, 89, I was starting to sort of tune in. I remember Clinton being president very well. And I remember there being this whole problem with Monica Lewinsky and all of that. But looking back on it, it's like, it's not the problem that he did that. And it's not the problem that he had the affair. The problem is he coerced a woman who couldn't say no into
Mm-hmm.
doing that. So at the same time that that is all happening, the Surgeon General got
Mm-hmm.
fired by Clinton for trying to get us to understand that masturbatory practices are awesome for safe
Right.
sex.
Right.
And we
Isn't that
haven't
extraordinary?
revisited that in this
No.
country. And that was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are we
It's
doing?
and again, I'll circle back and just point out that the law, the changing legal climate, restricting access to abortion, increasingly trying to restrict access to contraception, restricting access to pornography. Again, there is this motivation here that they don't want women to be able to have, quote, free sex. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want women to be able to have sex without potential consequences. In other words, they want women to have to potentially take risks and pay for sex. And that is about controlling female sexuality and treating female sexuality as a property.
Mm-hmm.
And that really goes back, hundreds and thousands of years around the viewing women as chattel. The dowry was,
Mm-hmm.
a payment for the female sexuality, and it's why, historically, virginity, was quote so valued, and why
Right.
infidelity of females was overwhelmingly persecuted or punished far more severely, because so many religious and conservative folks view female sexuality as something that must be controlled. Now, on the one hand, it's connected to this property thing and reproduction, but also, to be honest, I believe that many of these folks are intimidated by female sexuality because they
Oh,
know
yeah.
that women can have multiple orgasms. The world record, I think, is like a woman having like 65 or 70 orgasms in an hour. The world
Oh, God
record for
bless
a
her.
man, yeah, the world record for
Mm.
a man is, I think, 18 orgasms in a 24-hour period.
Oh, you
So
poor man. Oh, I'm sorry. Mm.
female sexuality is a Ferrari, and male sexuality is, at best a moped. And so I think that one reason that, historically there has been this effort to suppress and control female sexuality and to make women pay for it is because guys are afraid that if women realized that, hey, you kind of don't need us so much to enjoy the pleasure that you're capable of, that guys would lose out. And we see,
Okay.
honestly, we see that in the incel community right now, with
Mm-hmm.
with young men angry that they're not getting chosen to be boyfriends and mate, because and they're feeling like they should just be entitled to it. They shouldn't have to try to be a good man to have a girlfriend. They should just get it. Jordan
Right.
Peterson arguing for enforced monogamy in order to, quote, spread the wealth. And the wealth that he is talking about there is sex and reproduction. And
Oh,
so
they're
what
scaring
we,
the shit out of me, because
yeah,
now we've got MAGA Mike as the Speaker of the fucking House. And he came out of nowhere. I didn't even know who the fuck he was until he
mhm,
got voted in. And his big thing is making a marriage like this weird, it must be bound this way thing, this religious thing that, like, and making it harder for women to get divorced
mhm,
and
mhm.
harder for women to
Exactly.
escape
Look at
bad
that.
situations. Like,
Yep.
all of these things in my mind are like stacking on top of each other in this weird quest, like you said, to keep women from being sexually free.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, and,
Fuck.
and 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 this is something of a backlash or a pendulum swing to the changes that we've seen from feminism, with greater female independence, with greater female ability to seek education and employment, and to not be economically dependent upon a male partner. And so um, take away sexual freedom, and women are back in this dependent role. I, I I'm kind of very concerned and terrified by where the country is right now. But I think ultimately the pendulum will swing back, but it's just going to be so important for those of us in areas and states that are protecting the rights of women and sexual minorities to have autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
independence. It's so important for us to not ignore the importance, the critical value of that, because if we give up that freedom, there are so many terrifying things ahead.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna swing us back like a pendulum
Yeah,
a little
sorry.
bit,
Yeah.
but no, it's okay. Because actually, honestly, I'm gonna stop before I swing back. Do you think it has to do a bit with like the Me Too movement and like how that kind of freed some women up? A lot of us actually to be like, holy shit, that coercion was assault, and assault is not okay, and we shouldn't have that. So what can we do,
Mhm.
in order to keep ourselves safe, in order to enjoy sex? And it did, I think, spark a lot more women looking into self pleasure skills. It did inspire women to say, like, I'm going to take this back. I'm
Mhm.
going to make this less accessible to men.
Right. Yeah, it was taking power that had not been theirs. And yeah, I mean, has that explicit link of these attempts to suppress female autonomy and sexual independence been made to the experiences of the Me Too movement? I don't know. I would agree, Jenny. I think it's pretty reasonable, and certainly we see we see folks wanting women not to have the ability to push back at men in power who are exploiting their abilities and taking advantage of women. um
Right.
I yeah,
I know it's not going to get fixed in one conversation. Certainly not going to get fixed.
yeah.
But
I,
it's
I I think one of the things though that I would say, and all of this is complicated, and the reality, there's no simple answers. And
no.
so one of the things that I just find fascinating as we talk about this and explore this and think about it, is what is revealed about female sexuality and female sexual desires when we start to look at female sexual behaviors without the suppressing pressure of society and masculine, fear or insecurity. And
Hmm.
what we're seeing is that women who watch pornography are more likely to seek out rough sex or simulated rape pornography than men are. And women, identify that as typically more arousing than most men do. And interestingly, when we look even at other countries that have higher levels of kind of gender equality,
Hmm.
we see that women in areas with higher levels of gender equality are seeking out this kind of experience that is different from equality. So they are seeking out this ability to fantasize about kind of being dominated.
Mm-hmm.
There was this remarkable study just a little while back by Meg Moss, Maas, and she found that she looked at women's consumption of different genres of pornography and found that the women who watch rough sex pornography were much more aware of rape myths and things that would end up blaming the woman for being raped, right? The
Mm-hmm.
fascinating thing in this study, though, was that more conservative women watched kind of quote traditional feminine soft lighting romantic kind of
Mm.
erotica or pornography, and
Mm-hmm.
those women had higher beliefs in rape myths blaming women for being raped. And
Hmm.
so it is this juxtaposition that I think is super cool. I mean, we when we look at BDSM culture and community in general, they are much more effective and aware around consent and
Hell yeah.
negotiating
Because
consent,
of the hell
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because they're talking about it, because it's safe to talk about it.
Because
But
it's required. It's
yeah,
required, David, to talk about it and to talk about it often and to talk about it again because consent is not a blanket fucking term.
right.
And that is something that I think is just ingrained in kinky, freaky, sexy communities that isn't in others.
Right. And again, we see higher rates of sexual assault, predominantly on women, in more conservative societies with lower access to pornography and with greater suppression of discussion of sexuality or sex education.
Mm.
Because when we treat sex as this shameful thing, then it's more likely that the victim of sexual assault or sexual abuse blames themselves and feels like it is this dirty secret that they have to hide
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't been taught that it's okay to talk about sex, and they haven't been taught that if somebody does something to you or that your body is yours. I'm a clinical psychologist. I still practice. I still treat people. I was working with a woman the other day with sadly a pervasive history of sexual assault and sexual
Mm.
abuse in childhood, and she's raising her daughter now, and
Mm-hmm.
she was really sad about the fact that she was never taught that her body was hers and that it was okay to say no to a male in the way
Yep.
that she is teaching her daughter now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God she's teaching her daughter that now, but oh my God,
Yeah.
what a tragedy that just even a
Yeah.
couple of decades ago females were still, and around the world still happening, still being
Yeah.
taught that that rape is kind of the privilege of men and that women are there as property. Again, we go back to this
Mm-hmm.
female sexuality as property thing, and
Right.
these are the consequences of it.
Right. When Lindsay Murray was on, who's another Shaw
Mhm.
graduate, we discussed rape in relationships and how common it is, and how a lot of people, even our age, don't know that that's not okay. And
Mhm.
that's not a thing that should be allowed to happen. And just because you're in a relationship with somebody, you can still say no. It is okay. And I mean, I empathize so much with your client because I was that person. I was molested at a very young age, but I came up in a house where I had excellent models. My parents were very kind. They were very loving to each other, but still, because it was an older child who did it to me, had said, don't say anything. You asked for
Mhm.
this. You wanted this. You told me that you want. I was 7. Like, seriously.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I was like, oh shit, like, what did I do? Did I do something that made that happen? And I never told my parents.
Yeah.
Never. And then you have to like survive that and like unlearn that and then
Mhm.
start going through all of these lessons about autonomy, domain, consent, limits, boundaries. And to be quite honest, like the kink community is what taught me those things, that and a lot of psychotherapy. but
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
All
Like
of
the
us,
two of
right?
them together really opened me up to the fact that, holy shit, like, yeah, I always saw myself as like this very sexually evolved person because I had a lot of fuck buddies. I didn't settle down with boyfriends. I didn't settle down with girlfriends. I just kind of fucked around. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it wasn't as healthy as I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I did always have my porn, and that was hella healthy. I see that now that like my being a chick who watched porn and loved it and loved exploring different genres of it. And like you said, watching the rough stuff, even though
Mm-hmm.
I don't want those things to happen to me. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to
That's
be
right.
raped. I have
Yeah.
been raped. I don't want to be raped. I don't want to be violently assaulted, but I want to
Mm-hmm.
watch it because it's hot and it's
Yeah.
imaginary in
And
that
again,
respect.
yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. That again, up to 65% of women will endorse a rape or a forced sex kind of fantasy or being ravished, like in a lot of erotica. But overwhelmingly, those women don't want to be raped. But there is something about that, giving up power, being, when you are forced to engage in sex and fantasy, you can give up the shame of saying I want this because you're being forced in your fantasy to experience it. And so now, it's not that you're ashamed of being a slut, but this is happening to you, so you enjoy it. And I think there's a lot of, and then also our society and our media and our literature, romanticize and idealize, that kind of forced dominant sex. Um, so for a lot of reasons, I think women have this fantasy and react with arousal to that. Um, but what's interesting is that Meredith Chivers is a sexuality researcher who did research on response arousal, physiological arousal, psychological arousal to pornography, and in men, psychological arousal and physiological arousal very typically go together. That
Mm-hmm.
when a man is physically aroused, typically he's psychologically aroused watching pornography. But when women watched pornography, they demonstrated physiological arousal, increased blood flow, lubrication in their vagina, but oftentimes reported that they weren't psychologically aroused. And so we see this
Yep.
split in men and women. Now, why would women experience physiological arousal but not psychological arousal? One part of that is the
To stay
suppression of female
safe.
sexuality. Yeah, to stay safe, to not, to not get raped, but also because women are taught, if you act like you like sex, then you're a slut and you're going to get raped and you're going to get excluded and you're not going to be able to get married and have kids and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
um, what I find interesting, is again as we talk about female use pornography. So one thing I called up a recent study published in 2020, and it's
All right.
by Debbie Herbenek, who's at Indiana University in Indiana, and brilliant researcher and sexuality professional. Debbie Herbenek and several other authors, and it's called Diverse Sexual Behaviors and Pornography Use, published in 2020 in the Journal of Sexual Medicine. And they found lifetime pornography use was reported by 94% of men and 87% of women. So there you go. This is very recent research and certainly
Okay.
showing this higher level. Now, again, there's a generational impact, and as we went to older women, there were far lower levels, and then as we looked at past year use of pornography, we saw lower levels of that in women compared to men. But we are seeing these things change now.
Right.
Um, Let me ask you: when you watched pornography, did you watch
Mm-hmm.
pornography on Tumblr by any chance?
No.
No. So a lot of
Totally
women
missed out on Tumblr.
So a lot of women did,
Mm-hmm.
and There's this neat research from Europe that found that women were more likely to report watching pornographic GIFs, those looping videos,
Mm-hmm.
than men were.
Hmm.
And the speculation is, well, why? And for one thing, when men are more subject to the effects of sexual boredom and sexual novelty. And so when a man watches the same video or looks at the same picture over and over again, he finds it less arousing. Women show less of that effect. They do show some of it, but not at the
Hmm.
strength that men do. But secondly, when a man encounters something in pornography that they find, kind of unappealing or disturbing or distressing, a man is more likely to be able to ignore it and maintain sexual arousal and find something else to watch.
Mm-hmm.
When women watch pornography that includes, somebody they find unattractive or somebody engaging in behaviors they find unappealing or disgusting or, abusive even,
Right.
the women are more likely to experience a decrease in psychological sexual arousal. They lose their mojo.
Okay.
So, watching GIFs, you know what's in it. There's not going to
Hmm.
be any surprises. They can find a video or a clip that they know they're going to find arousing. Now, one of the reasons they liked Tumblr was that they could find women who curated a a Tumblr list of videos that
Mm-hmm.
they liked, and they share taste and interest with me. So I feel safer watching these videos as opposed to going to Pornhub or Tubes or whatever and
Mm-hmm.
maybe encountering something that turns me off.
Hmm.
So I find the
That's
reason
wild.
so the reason I find it so neat is it's adaptive. It's
Mm-hmm.
women, interestingly, using technology, using the technology of GIFs and the internet and Tumblr and social media and stuff like that in order to adapt and seek out
Mm-hmm.
a fulfilling, exciting sexual experience, navigating that they know I'll get turned off. So if I run into something, so I want to make sure I don't, so I can enjoy my orgasm.
Right. Right.
I think that's so brilliant and so cool.
Huh. I wonder if it has anything to do with like the fanfic community that exists in Tumblr because there's so much fan fiction written by women and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is filthy. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it is.
Oh yeah,
It is
the
deliciously
slash fiction and
filthy. Oh my
yes,
God. About like, things you would
mm-hmm.
never expect there to be
Yeah,
fanfic that goes there about. Oh yeah, these ladies are
mm-hmm.
making it happen.
The romantic homosexual relationship between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy,
Mhm.
again it is this. Now that also is an interesting difference between males and females when we look at engagement with erotic or sexual stimuli. Um, Women, when they sexually fantasize, are more likely to fantasize about people they know. Men are more likely to fantasize about women they don't know or people they don't know, or simply to fantasize about body parts, boobs or
Hmm,
butts or vaginas or whatever.
I can see
And
that.
we see again, yeah, we see some of that in engagement with erotic, with erotic materials. Now, when women watch pornography, they tend to watch the same kind of rough or hardcore porn that men watch. Um, but when men or women watch pornography, men are more likely to look at the woman's face in the pornography than men are when as they've done
Oh, okay.
eye
I'm with you
movement
now.
tracking stuff. When men look at the woman's face more than the women do.
Hmm.
Um, and then when we look at erotic fiction, slash fiction, erotica, romance novels, etc., I will shout out "Kiss Me Quick" podcast by Rose Caraway. She's a dear friend of mine. She narrated my first book, "Insatiable Wives." It's out as an audiobook, and I love that there are couples who are exploring or thinking about hotwifing or cuckolding, and the
Mhm.
husband and wife take a road trip and listen to my book with Rose narrating it, and they send me pictures of the book on their dash, on their radio, as they're listening to it, and I just think it's amazing. But Rose
That's
Caraway,
awesome.
she's got this, Kiss Me Quick podcast where she
Mm-hmm.
reads erotica.
Mm-hmm.
And it is largely listened to by women. And
Mm-hmm.
women prefer to engage, again, just like in fantasy, prefer to engage with a character, a person. Now, is that because they're taught that if you have sex with a person
Mm-hmm.
you're less of a slut? Or is there something more kind of predisposed, biologically based,
Mm.
as a difference between women and men? I don't know. I know lots
Right.
of women who are into casual or anonymous sex, but I know a lot more men that are into that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that difference coming out of social programming and social aspects around sexuality, or other stuff? I don't know, and I think it's fascinating.
Right. Yeah. Somebody should research it.
Mm-hmm.
Who could this be? I wonder, do you have any opinions or thoughts or research, what have you, whatever, on when it comes to women who watch porn with their partners as opposed to just
So
alone?
yeah, so it's a great question. So first, people don't hear me when I say this, right? But I recognize that there are negative aspects and negative effects to pornography, particularly in people that have a lot of shame about their sexuality and about masturbation. If people are ashamed of sexuality, masturbation, and their sexual desires, if they watch pornography, they're more likely to experience negative effects from it. They're more likely to feel shame and guilt over it, to get depressed and anxious. Um, it is not the case that I view pornography as completely and totally positive. I know that there are dark sides to this. And we see some of that and when we look at relationships. Now, uh, there are claims out there, quote, that pornography is involved in and predictive of a majority of divorces out there.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
That claim is based on really bogus research from a really poor survey conducted at a divorce attorney convention.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
we
exactly where you need that
exactly, yeah,
information from,
yeah.
right?
We
Yeah.
actually tried to get the raw data, and they refused to give it to us. But so,
Shocker.
but when we look at the impact of pornography on relationships, I I love to call out a researcher in Oklahoma, Sam Perry. He's now a good friend of mine. But when he first published his dissertation, I think it was in 2017, his research found that consumption of pornography predicted higher rates of later divorce. At time one, consumption of pornography, and at time two, the people who'd watched pornography were more likely to be divorced. Well, a lot of us in the field, when that research came out, said, wait a minute, I think there's some other things going on here, like
Possibly.
masturbation, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
desire discrepancy, for instance. So,
Mm-hmm.
to his credit, Sam went back a few years later and he reanalyzed his data, and he found that when you remove the variance associated with masturbation, that pornography consumption in a couple actually had a slightly positive, neutral to slightly positive effect on marriage, and not predicting divorce. But when we look at masturbation, we see a prediction of divorce. Now, it's not that masturbation causes divorce, but increased masturbation in the couple is an indication of desire discrepancy. It's an indication that
Mm.
there is a mismatch of sexual interest, libido, sexual desire in this couple. And particularly in men, we see it in women as well, but particularly we see it stronger in men, that
Mm-hmm.
when a male is not having as much sex or the kind of sex as he wants to have, he is more likely to masturbate more frequently and watch pornography more frequently. So where the research is right now is that if one party in a couple is watching pornography in secret from the other party, or watching much more pornography than the other partner,
Mm-hmm.
then it is likely that this is an indicator of a potentially troubled relationship that may dissolve in the future because of this mismatch and these frictions. When we see couples where both parties watch pornography at relatively equal levels, or when they watch pornography together, it is typically predictive of a healthy, satisfied, sexually satisfied relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like to point out is that a woman who can watch pornography with her heterosexual partner, and let's just realize we're mostly here talking about heterosexuals,
Right.
um,
For
that
today.
yeah, for a woman, no, we can talk about lesbian porn and gay men watching porn. I love all of those topics, um, but a woman that can watch pornography with her husband is more likely to be a woman that has lower levels of sexual shame, has
Mm-hmm.
accepted her own sexuality, is
Mm-hmm.
probably not highly religious or highly sexually conservative or moralistic or judgmental. But a
Mm-hmm.
woman whose husband has to keep secret his watching pornography is more likely to be a woman who has very strong judgment and bias against pornography, against masturbation, is more heteronormative and more traditional in her attitudes. And what we see is that when people watch pornography, they become less religious over time. They
Mm-hmm.
become more accepting of sexual diversity in other people and themselves.
Okay.
So, religious people, including these religious wives, view pornography as an assault on their sexual values and their sexual ways of life
Mm-hmm.
because it really is changing the way people view sexuality. And so then the partner that's watching pornography becomes more and more dissatisfied because they're seeing people in porn having the kind of sex they want to have and
Mm.
they don't get to.
Well,
And
the
so
fantasy. So
that's
they're
right.
seeing the fantasy, they're
They're
seeing the
seeing the fantasy.
imaginary, and they're
That's right.
thinking that that is something that they can
Yeah,
compare to the reality.
right.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Jenny, because more conservative, less sexually educated people are more likely to view pornography as
Right.
realistic depictions of sex. And and then they learn negative lessons. They learn you don't need lube. They learn anal sex is easy, just jump in. They learn that giving a woman an orgasm is really easy, just bring a bunch of friends.
Oh,
um,
like my nephew turned like 16, I think. And I was like, "You have a girlfriend now?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "All right, cool. Girls don't like to get throat fucked all the time. No girl wants to be skull fucked. If she does, let her tell you that. Don't just jump in there. Don't just do that. All right. That's not a thing."
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And let's be clear, and I'll reference Debbie Herbenek again. She has some really cool research recently talking about the increased frequency of choking during sex, particularly in younger people in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And people who watch more pornography are somewhat more likely to engage in choking or receive choking.
Mm.
Now, it is not the case that choking is always non-consensual, but what we do
Right.
see is that lots of people are engaging in choking during sex without negotiating it, without
Or
discussing it, without.
understanding that
That's
it's a
right.
pressure, it's not to crush your windpipe.
Yeah,
Like there are
and
different levels of this, and you have to have different amounts of trust
that's right.
already
Not even
built.
understanding that this is an unsafe kind of behavior that we have to
Mm-hmm.
be very cautious about. So again,
Wait, I gotta say,
yeah.
I think that 50 Shades of Grey did that. Like, I'm sorry, like I know that everybody thinks like it really opened up the world or something to porn, but I think it opened up the world to, or not open up the world to porn, but open up the world to like the secret allure of
Hmm.
BDSM. I think that it also had, it's a very disingenuous representation of what
Hmm.
it looks like. It was written by someone who's like a conservative Christian woman. Am I
Hmm.
wrong here? Who like didn't
Mostly right, I believe.
experience
Yeah,
these
yeah,
things.
yeah,
So uh, it's
yeah,
like a Twilight compared
yeah.
to like Interview with a Vampire if you're going to go
That's a good point.
entertainment wise,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. 50
And
Shades of Grey was originally written as Twilight fan fiction.
there you go. There you go.
Yeah, yeah,
So it, I just
yeah.
feel like it inspired a lot of housewives to
Hmm.
ask for things from someone who doesn't understand how they work and doesn't understand that they can later say no or later rescind that
Hmm.
want. And that's terrifying to me. That's a little
Yeah, I
terrifying.
mean,
Yeah.
double-edged sword, and now, and I acknowledge all that because I talk about exactly those issues. At the same time, it's one of the first times that we've seen women from conservative backgrounds being empowered to identify a sexual fantasy or desire.
Okay.
And after 50 Shades of Grey, a lot of sex therapists like myself, we saw couples where the wife was for the first time going to the husband and saying, I really want to explore this fantasy. And we were in some cases helping the couple negotiate how to do that, doing
Hmm.
education. And in some cases, guys were saying, I don't know if I can do this. This feels like rape. This feels like something I'm not. And so then for the first time, we saw women identifying the potential of non-monogamy or
Right.
sexuality accepted outside the relationship in order to fulfill that fantasy. It is the first time that I've ever seen women empowered enough to put that on the table.
Okay.
And so I certainly agree with you. Bad representation of consent, of negotiation, of all of these issues. But at the same time, it was a piece of that female sexual empowerment that we're now seeing under attack.
Right. So I guess that kind of gets me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is all right. So I definitely, before we get done, I want to talk to you about like sex addiction, porn addiction, masturbation addiction. Do you lump them all together? How are they different than other kinds of addiction, and why do you have this book called The Myth of Sex Addiction? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know that's
Yeah.
a lot to ask, and we might have to do a different episode. But
So,
I also wanted to ask you real quick about the Katie Couric episode. Like what you're saying right now totally aligns with that. That was something I think I watched for Shaw the first time. But like you being on that episode and trying to bring it back to this place of like reason and logic and not emotion and not religion. Okay, that gets me to 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey is how we could talk to the people who are overcome with emotional response,
yeah.
religious, overtones and shame, guilt, fear surrounding
Yeah.
pornography. How do we
Yeah.
talk to
So,
them?
yeah. I mean, I've learned a lot about how to talk about it. So for your listeners, if you Google or go on YouTube,
I'll
David
put it in the
Lay.
show notes.
Yeah, my last name is Ley. I know it sounds like get laid, but of course, I had to be a sex doctor with that name. But I was on Katie Couric when she had a talk show, and Katie describes herself as a prude, and the topic was around pornography, and Katie had a whole lot of real panic and fear, and frankly a lot of myths
Yeah,
around
she was talking about like
pornography.
8-year-olds. Oh God, and this and
Yeah,
that. She kept going back to 8-year-olds watching porn. It's
yeah.
like,
Porn-induced
really?
erectile dysfunction,
They're
which is a
playing
myth.
Minecraft, asshole.
Yeah,
That's not what they're doing.
and it did go well. It was painful, but it was a lesson for me in terms of how to talk about these issues. And so I realized that I had to be in order to connect with people about this. I had to start talking about stories rather than research. I had to start talking about people. I had to acknowledge the foundation of kind of moral fear and panic here in order to now move us forward a little bit. And
There was something that you said. I have to bring it up. We are not ignoring what research shows because we think common sense is smarter, and that's dangerous. Or we are ignoring
yeah,
what
yeah,
research shows because we think common sense is smarter. Because she was like, common sense this, common sense
yeah,
that.
yeah. I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about
And
common
that's
sense about
dangerous.
pornography. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because common sense again is based on those moral, social, programmed beliefs, and
All those overtones.
and that's where we can bring it back to the issue of sex addiction. And so I ended up writing my second book, The Myth of Sex Addiction, as I was challenged on is sex addiction real? And at the time I didn't
Mm-hmm.
believe it was, but I said, well, maybe I'm wrong. And so I spent a year and a half reading and researching and interviewing and traveling and looking at sex addiction treatment programs and facilities, and at the
Mm-hmm.
end of it, I was convinced not only is it not real, but it's also dangerous because it is moral. It is morality based. It is people, clinicians predominantly, who have allowed morality and social biases around sexuality, predominantly heterosexual and traditional monogamy focused, vanilla focused sexuality values to intrude into clinical thinking. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
by accident. Sex addiction is diagnosed overwhelmingly by religiously based therapists. It's not by accident that sex addiction is that most sex addiction therapists themselves identify as sex addicts, because there's this subjective kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
When we start looking at the research, what we find is that about 90% of people that, quote, get diagnosed as sex addicts have a major mental health condition, typically anxiety, major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. And the sexual behaviors, most typically porn consumption and masturbation, are efforts to cope with or manage the effects of those mental health conditions. So I don't know that we should be diagnosing something when it is a symptom of something else.
Mm-hmm.
What we have found over the past couple of years, by a researcher named Josh Grubbs, he's one of the leaders in this, is that so-called sex addicts or porn addicts nowadays, it used to be sex addiction was predominantly an expression of infidelity. Now,
Mm-hmm.
70% of self-identified sex addicts, their primary behavior is watching pornography and masturbating. And what we find in these self-identified sex addicts and porn addicts is that they're not actually having more sex or watching more porn than anybody else, but they feel worse about it. The
Mm-hmm.
reason they feel worse about it is that they are experiencing moral incongruence. They were taught, typically religiously based. A childhood history of religiosity is one of the strongest predictors of identifying as a sex addict or a porn addict, because these are people who grew up with limited sexual education, limited idea of sexual diversity, and now they live in a world with the internet and greater sexual diversity, access, and acceptance of homosexuality and same-sex relationships, kink behaviors, etc., in society. And they are now struggling with the conflict between wanting and enjoying those fantasies or behaviors and feeling bad about them because they were taught that those fantasies or desires made them a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
And when the higher levels of sexual shame predict greater levels of subjective sexual discontrol. Now, it's not that these people are actually out of sexual control. They're not out there, raping the dog on the street.
Right.
They actually are in quite high levels of self-control, but they
Mm-hmm.
feel, because they experience desires that they don't want to have,
Mm-hmm.
they're constantly fighting against themselves. When a person comes to me these days and says, I'm a porn addict or a sex addict, what I hear in my clinical head is, I have sexual interests or desires that I wish I didn't have. Now, as a therapist, I want to sit down with them and understand, why do you think that you're a bad person for having those? Why don't you want to have these desires? Well, I
Right.
want to be faithful to my wife. I want to be heterosexual. I don't want to be kinky. I'm afraid that that makes me a bad person or I'll lose control.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the biggest chunks of these people, and so I can be compassionate with that struggle. And
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that it's really important to be compassionate. But there's also this other group, and this other group is these folks who are kind of porn addicts and angry, and they're angry about it, and what we find in them is that the number one predictor of identifying as a porn addict is narcissism, and
Hmm.
particularly feelings of victimhood. And so these are people that
Oh.
feel like their struggles with pornography and their difficulty controlling the desire to masturbate and watch pornography is the fault of other people. It is the responsibility of pornography. They don't
Okay.
have to exert self-control. Instead, we need to restrain the pornography industry to keep me safe.
So these are like the same guys who have like the death grip and like can't come with someone else in the room sometimes because they're
Some,
like,
yeah,
some of
yeah,
them. I'm not, yeah, I can't
yeah,
like
and
over
and
generalize. But like I
yeah,
feel like there's another root of that is
hmm
like they've become like attached to the porn in a really unhealthy way.
well, we see this particularly in kind of the online nofap sort of folks that
Okay.
are engaging in this desire to battle their desire to masturbate. They're engaging in this online kind of cult like behavior to battle their desire to masturbate or
Okay.
watch pornography. And
So that
and
goes back to like that whole thing that we were talking about,
that's
like
right.
this religious
Yeah.
outburst of, Paul and Morgan or
hmm
Morgan and Paul are the ones that come into my mind. I think it's Paul and Morgan. Have you heard of them?
I'm not sure.
They're like second generation Duggar people.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
and
Okay.
basically she had sex before they got married and he constantly shames her about it. They've got this whole
Oh,
YouTube channel and
yuck.
they're teaching, they have 700
Yeah.
videos. They're teaching young Christians how to interact in relationship. And it's,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's
And
mind boggling.
yeah. Now again, I will go back that there are a lot of men, and I said earlier that porn-induced erectile dysfunction is a myth, and I think it's always an important thing to call out because there's really no scientific evidence that watching pornography
Okay.
increases risk of erectile dysfunction. In fact, the reverse. What we see is higher levels of sexual arousal
Mm-hmm.
in men that watch pornography. But what we do see is that there are men who have a whole lot of sexual anxiety. They don't have a whole lot of sexual experience. They don't feel particularly competent or confident in sexuality.
Mm.
And they can masturbate and watch pornography and get aroused and not feel anxious because the internet's not difficult to satisfy. You don't have to buy it dinner,
The
right? You don't have to
orgasms
wear.
come so easily
That's
for the
right.
women.
You don't have to
So
wear. You don't have to
easily.
wear a condom when you're fucking the internet.
Mm-mm.
What you do when you're trying to have sex, when you're trying to have sex with a partner, you need to worry about their experiences and their
Mm-hmm.
pleasure, and that is hard work. It's great work if you can get it. But if you're an anxious guy, then you start to get nervous about, well, am I going to get erect? Am I going to be able to give her an orgasm? Am I and it starts to spiral into this
Mm-hmm.
anxiety shame spiral, which is the cure for an erection. Getting nervous
Gotcha.
about getting an erection is the way to not get an erection.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys then say, well, I can get erect just fine watching porn. I can't get erect here with this partner. It must be porn's fault. As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to acknowledging that masturbating watching pornography is a radically different experience from having
Mm-hmm.
sex with a willing partner. And we need to
Yeah,
understand
they
those
can't be
differences.
compared. They
Yeah.
can't be compared.
And so my mantra about all of these things is, sexuality is the most complex, overdetermined, multiply influenced human behavior that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot reduce it to simplistic kind of black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, to understand and address these sexual behavior problems that people struggle with, we have to come up with equally sophisticated solutions. Blaming pornography is kindergarten science.
Mm-hmm.
I am more interested in dealing with assessing, diagnosing the people and
Mm-hmm.
understanding the person so that I can understand why this person is struggling and these other people are not.
Right.
That's the difference I want to explore because that's how I get to help this person.
Mm-hmm. Damn right. Damn right. Oh, I feel like we hit so many other points besides what we started for.
Yeah,
But I hope you're okay with that journey.
absolutely. It is all a journey, and again, that's why I'm so thankful that there are folks like you out there doing this and doing these podcasts because people get to hear this message that wouldn't otherwise, and people get to
Mm-hmm.
hear sexual positivity and a rejection of shame from you and your guests. And one of the greatest joys of my career and writing is that I get letters and emails from people who say, I had so much shame about my sexual desires until I read this that you wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, oh, maybe it's not me that's wrong and bad. And it's that I think might get me into heaven. Because otherwise my chances are pretty low. But I'm hopeful that St. Peter will say, oh, okay, David, we weren't going to let you in, but there were all these people that had all these orgasms and positive sexual experiences and embraced themselves because of you and your work. We'll let you in.
We'll let you pass. You
That's
get a
right.
pass.
That's what I'm hoping for.
That's a wonderful hope. Is there anything that you want my listeners to hear on the way out? Is there's like one thing that you want them to walk away from this discussion understanding?
I want people to sit down and think about how they feel about their sexuality and their sexual fantasies. Sit there when you're not turned on. Sit and think about how you feel about your sexual fantasies. And are you ashamed of them? If you are, why? Who told you that you should be ashamed and keep that secret and that that's wrong? And are you sure that they're right? And do you want to let them control your adult sexual autonomy?
Mm-hmm.
That's the question that will help women push back against these governmental and social desires to take away their sexual freedom. It's the way that we push back against therapists. They're shaming people for being non-heterosexual or non-vanilla or non-monogamous. We have to start questioning these things. And here's the neat thing. You get to make up your mind. So long as you're coming from a place of consent and honesty and mutual respect and integrity, health. What I want is a model of sexual health that doesn't depend on what the pastor thinks. And these kind of conversations are how we get there.
Okay. Yep. I can see that. This is how we start to help, right? This is how we start to heal. Yeah.
Yep.
I like this.
Absolutely.
I dig this. This is the boots on the ground work. Yeah. Yeah.
It totally is.
Well, it has been so lovely having you. You said so many nice things about me. I'm like super duper excited. And I hope that you'll come back because I feel like there's 20,000 more questions I have for you. Yeah. And listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this and you'll come back next time.
Okay. Hey, thank you. Stay in touch and keep doing what you're doing. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Storytime with the Intimacy Ally. We hope you learned a bit more about putting the fire back in your romantic relationships, exploring communication and emotional readiness in all relationships, and how to expand your definition of intimacy so you can reach your relationship goals. Go to theintimacyally.com to subscribe and never miss an episode. Follow the links in the show notes to social media and events. Till next time, keep on learning, growing, and thinking. Storytime with the Intimacy Ally podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered as health or mental health advice.